It's Deborah from Embody Nature, and I am here today to talk about how the patterns underneath our behaviours and how we show up in our relationships. So I guess today I'm really looking at a conversation around the attachment dance, why we chase, why we withdraw, and why we keep getting stuck. So have you ever noticed that the more you try to get close to your partner, the further away that they seem to go? Or perhaps you're the person who needs space when things become emotionally intense, and the more your partner wants to talk, the more that you want to shut down and withdraw. And I guess the more that you shut down, the more that they pursue you. And the more they pursue you, the more that you want to get away. So it just becomes this cycle of chase. And I guess if you've experienced this, you're not alone. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're incompatible. You might be caught in an attachment cycle. So today we're going to look at the 4 broad attachment patterns, where they can come from, and particularly what happens when an anxious attachment style meets an avoidant one. So if we're here to talk about the types of attachment, the first one is a secure attachment. So a securely attached person generally has this underlying sense of, I am worthy of love and I can trust that relationships can be safe. And they can generally experience closeness without losing themselves, tolerate some distance, and communicate their needs. They can repair after conflict, ask for help, and give their partner space without experiencing it as any sense of abandonment. So importantly, secure doesn't mean never getting triggered. It means having a greater capacity to return to that connection. So the next type is anxious. So our anxious attachment style often carries that underlying fear. Will you leave me? Am I still loved? Are we okay? And connection feels incredibly important in this space. So when connection feels threatened, the nervous system becomes highly activated. And I guess this can lead to seeking reassurance, wanting to talk immediately, overthinking, checking, pursuing, having difficulty tolerating distance, and that heightened sensitivity to changes in tone or behaviour. They just seem to have their radar always attuned and scanning the environment for that sort of lack of connection. So underneath the behaviour is often something very vulnerable. It is, please don't leave me. The next is the avoidant attachment style, and it can carry a very different underlying belief. It is, I need to rely on myself, because as these avoidants were growing up, they did often have to rely on themselves. So closeness might sometimes feel a little overwhelming for these guys. Emotionally, intensity can activate a desire to withdraw. It can create distance, or it can shut down. So, and I guess this can look like avoiding difficult conversations, minimizing feelings or sharing their feelings, that intellectualizing things or becoming very quiet, needing a lot of space, or feeling really overwhelmed when there's emotional demands in the space, and shutting down during conflict. And underneath it may be, I need space to feel safe, which is where, we can start looking at childhood and how that came up for them, because often in childhood, for an avoidant, there were several needs that weren't met from them. And so they weren't able to sort of express their emotions, or to, talk about their emotions in any way. And they weren't getting the support, from one of their caregivers around regulating their emotions. So they really, really struggled to be able to find a way to have their needs met. So the next attachment is it's a disorganized, or sometimes we call it a fearful avoidant. And this is where someone can feel both a strong desire for connection and a fear of it. So they might move towards somebody and they want that closeness, but if they're feeling a sense of rejection from that person and they get too close, they can actually have a bit of internal conflict and then push away. So I guess, how do these, if we're looking at the avoidant patterns, so I guess I want to particularly explore the avoidant attachment for a moment, because what we call avoidance can make much more sense when we understand what happened underneath. So imagine a little child who is sad, and they go to their caregiver and says, I'm sad. But instead of receiving comfort, perhaps the caregiver said, stop crying. Many of us have experienced that. Or you're fine, or I'll give you something to cry about. Or they become actually angry at them. Or perhaps the caregiver simply becomes overwhelmed by the child's emotions themselves because they don't know how to regulate their own emotions either. So the child learns really quickly, my feelings are too much. So then they might try anger and then they get the same response. They try sadness, they get the same response. They try communicating and they get the same response. And gradually the child learns there isn't anyone able to help me with this. So what option do they have left? They begin to manage their emotions alone. And because children aren't actually designed to manage overwhelming emotions completely by themselves, their nervous system has to find another way. So they might learn to suppress. They might learn to disconnect, minimize, distract, or withdraw. And eventually, shutdown can become a very effective protective strategy for them. Not because the child is broken, but because their nervous system is trying to protect them. So what looks like emotional unavailability in an adult might once have been emotional protection in a child. And so this is where, I really want to, be clear that attachment isn't your identity. It's an adaptation here. It's something your nervous system learned in relationships. And because it was learnt, it can actually be changed. But you don't need to teach people how to change. We can't do it all at once, I guess. It's a journey that we go through learning to change. So now imagine a child who experiences connection as unpredictable. So we're looking at the other side of the coin now. With our more anxious attachment. So sometimes that caregiver is available and sometimes they're not. Sometimes the child gets attention and sometimes they don't. And so the child's nervous system learns, I need to keep checking that you're still there. In adulthood, that can become a real heightened sensitivity to disconnection. So a delayed text might land for our anxious partner as really heavy, or a change in tone, their partner becoming quiet, someone needing space, and suddenly the nervous system starts asking, are we okay? Are you leaving? Have I done something wrong? And that person might pursue. They might want to talk. They might want to seek reassurance. They might ask questions, and they might become increasingly activated in this space. And here's the important distinction. The behavior might look demanding, but underneath it, it might be the feeling of, I don't feel safe without connection. So when we look again at that anxious avoidance cycle, the chase that starts happening, I guess really thinking the anxious person might feel that disconnection and that nervous system becomes activated, and then they start pursuing that connection. So the avoidant person experiences a sense of pressure in this moment and they become overwhelmed. They withdraw and they shut down. And so the anxious person experiences even more disconnection now and they pursue harder, and that avoidant person withdraws further. So you can just see this cycle happening. And around it goes. So this is where two people can genuinely love each other and still make each other profoundly unsafe, because neither person intends to hurt the other. They're both trying to regulate their own nervous system. One moves towards, the other moves away. And each person's strategy accidentally triggers the other person's deepest fears. So the anxious person fears is you'll leave me, and the avoidant person fears you will overwhelm me. And so the more one pursues, the more one withdraws. And the more one withdraws, the more the first one pursues. So that's the cycle here. So how do we break this cycle? I guess now this is where people often make a mistake. They start asking, who is the problem? Is the anxious person too needy? Is the avoidant person emotionally unavailable? But it's not actually the most helpful question. The question is, what is actually happening between us? What is this pattern? So it's almost a case of, and in the work that I do, I help people map their patterns so that we can become really clear on what's happening in this space. The anxious partner might need to develop greater capacity to self-regulate and to tolerate some space without immediately interpreting it as abandonment. And the avoidant partner might need to develop that greater capacity to stay emotionally present rather than automatically disappearing when the emotions become intense. So neither person should have to abandon themselves to make the relationship work. I guess this is the deeper work that we do. So I want you to ask yourself, when I feel disconnected from my partner, do I move towards them or do I move away? When conflict becomes emotionally intense, what does my nervous system want to do? Do you want to fight, flight, flee, fawn? Like, what is going on here? The freeze. What do I fear will happen if I don't use my usual strategy? So just really ponder some of these. These would be really good. Grab your journal and have a answer these questions. It'll give you some really good insight into what's going on. So your attachment style, it isn't a diagnosis or who you are. It's just a map of your nervous system. And it's how you learnt about relationships. And once you can see the pattern, you can begin to understand why you do what you do and why your partner does what they do. Because sometimes you're not actually fighting each other. You're both fighting for safety in completely different ways. So I guess it's really starting to look, I guess, the work that I do. I've got a 6-week relationship program that I do, and we cover some of these, all of the things I've covered in the last few weeks. We're up to week 4 now, the types of areas that we go into. But we sit in working through our needs and our attachments, but we also, I also do some deeper work individually with people around working through what are the deeper patterns inside themselves? What is actually happening on that subconscious level that's actually creating these patterns that are coming out and making, being avoidant and being anxious more likely to happen than becoming securely attached. So if we can actually do that work at that deeper level and go back, and almost like it takes the edge off of those emotions when we feel them, and we can learn to regulate ourselves better. So through my trauma and emotional regulation coaching. So I think it's something that has really impacted in how I show up in my world and in relationships. And I think there's work that can be done in this space that can really just change everything for you and really create your capacity to sit in these beautiful relationships, because we love these people we're in relationships with, but we can just sit in the space of it feeling overwhelming, and our patterns just kick us into our brain, where we're just fighting, flighting, freezing and fawning, and then we just feel so overwhelmed, we just want something to change. And then sometimes that is the relationship that we push away, or the person we push away. So I guess if today's session made you recognize yourself or your relationship, that's the beginning of the work, not the end. I guess inside my deeper relationship work, we go beyond identifying the pattern and we look right at the nervous system, the attachment wounds, unmet needs, and at those emotional responses underneath it, and begin creating a different way of relating, because you don't have to keep living inside the same relationship dance. So I guess, the key message I want to leave you is, for my anxious friends, we can get a better perspective of life rather than being stuck in the revolving record of please don't leave me. We can actually return to ourselves and learn how not to abandon ourselves and how to show up for ourselves, and not need to see ourselves through the eyes of the other person. We can learn to feel like we're good enough, and that we are, because the wounds behind both of these are often the same. It is that feeling of not being good enough, in both our avoidance and attachments, and also the abandonment that we've experienced as a child. We've actually got more in common than we've got apart, but it's just the skills and the tools so that we can learn to understand each other and function in relationship. So yeah, I'd love my anxious friends to know that you don't have to be left, the avoidance, that they don't need to feel that overwhelmed, and the secure people, that we can be close and also have space. We can have conflict and remain connected. So underneath, if we can move further towards being secure, I guess that's the key, is if we've got our anxious and our avoidant and we're doing laps around the circle, when both of us do the work to become closer to being securely attached. So for the avoidant, that is trying to, learn to understand and share what our emotions are. So being able to, either show or speak what our emotions are, because a lot of my avoidant friends hold a lot of this stuff under the surface and don't share how they're really feeling, and until they get to that overwhelm. And so being able to express those feelings, and then being able to regulate yourself, these are the skills that will help you to become more closely to the secure. My anxious friends being able to, and this is what I do in my relationships as well, when I'm feeling triggered and I'm feeling the distance, then I do some work on my own to be able to regulate myself first, and to be able to turn up in a way that's going to be less likely to trigger the other person. So it's beautiful work. There's so much in here, and I'd love to unpack this. I unpack this more in my 6-week program. So if you want to connect with me and join up or find out more, just DM me and we can have a conversation. I do a 45-minute free conversation if you're ever interested in the work that I do and how it might fit with you. And there's no obligation at the end. If it's not your thing, that's fine. Like, we've had a great conversation. So feel free to get in touch and book one of my clarity sessions. And I hope you have a fantastic Saturday. See ya.